Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Words About Books, a poorly spoken podcast. I'm Ben. I'm here with my co host, Nate. And today we're talking about Bruce Campbell and how to make love his way. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Bruce Campbell is a legendary B-movie actor, probably best known for the cult horror kind of eventually comedy classic Evil Dead series. He's had recurring roles on Burn Notice, as well as Hercules the Legendary Journey and Xena Warrior Princess. His series Ash vs. the Evil Dead recently wrapped up on Starz. Campbell has also directed a handful of films, as well as a few episodes of Xena. And Nate, I'm kind of wondering, what's your exposure to Bruce Campbell? I'm a huge Evil Dead fan, but I'm wondering what you've seen him in.
Well, first of all, I did not realize he was in Xena Warrior Princess.
He's the King of Thieves?
Huh. Wow. Yeah, I didn't know that. My experience with Bruce Campbell was actually, it began with Burn Notice. Do you actually know anything about Burn Notice?
I remember seeing... I'm going to reveal something about myself. I promise I'm not a 50-year-old man. But I only ever saw ads for Burn Notice when I was watching NCIS. I low-key love NCIS. Just throwing it out there.
Okay, then. I learned something new about you.
Yep. But no, please tell me about Burn Notice.
Well, Burn Notice was a show on the USA Network about a spy who he was burned and stranded in Miami. So he was cut off completely from the U.S. government. He's blacklisted, essentially. The whole show is gradually unraveling the conspiracy that burned him, and also using his spy skills to help local people out to do the right thing or to make money. Bruce Campbell is one of the 4 or 5 main characters of that. He's the guy who knows a guy. He always has a buddy in some form of government or who happens to have material or equipment available. And in my opinion, he was probably the best part of that show. He was the comic relief and easily my favorite character.
I was gonna ask if he played a funnier character. So is he kind of like a fast talking, like wheeling and dealing guy, or
he is like a, how do I say this? A couch surfing bum who couch surfs with older women who he romanticizes, and he also really prefers to drink mojitos. That's how I would describe his character. He doesn't take a lot seriously.
I have to ask, have you ever seen Evil Dead?
Actually, yeah, I saw it after Burn Notice. I think I actually texted you after I watched it, and I didn't care much for the first one, or to a lesser extent the second one. I was a lot more on board with Army of Darkness.
You didn't like Evil Dead 2?
It was okay. I didn't dislike it.
But you really liked Army of Darkness?
Yeah, I figured that would be a controversial stance.
It's no, I mean, I don't know how often I've mentioned it on the podcast already, but I'm a huge horror movie fan, horror everything fan, and I love the original Evil Dead. I loved Evil Dead 2. I loved Army of Darkness as well. And I actually even liked now this is where I'm going to get in trouble, I even liked the Evil Dead remake. So,
yeah. I actually haven't seen it, but I assume that is a controversial stance. Is that right?
Well, it's interesting because Bruce Campbell and Sam Raimi were involved. They didn't direct, and they weren't in it. And Ash isn't in it. But they tried to remake the first Evil Dead was a serious attempt at making a horror movie. The second Evil Dead was a parody of the first one. So the first Evil Dead had become a cult classic and kind of campy and enjoyed somewhat ironically. Even though I thought like it had some legitimately decent moments, but they didn't really know how to make movies. Bruce Campbell, I don't think this was his first acting gig, but he self-described didn't know how to act, and Sam Raimi was still a young director. They paid for the entire production themselves, and it wound up being a campy cult classic that relied a lot on shock value. Evil Dead 2 was sort of straight up slapstick comedy. Oh boy, I don't want to make this an Evil Dead podcast, but I could go on. The point is, the reason I keep asking about Evil Dead is just because Bruce Campbell playing Ash is the iconic Bruce Campbell to me. Like, when I picture Bruce Campbell, he has a chainsaw attached to his hand. And I think he hates that I think of him that way. Based on this book and the sheer number of Bruce Campbell interviews I watched researching this.
Yeah, I didn't realize that Duke Nukem stole a lot from Ash.
So did you see that interview? Was that the one where he was at Microsoft?
I did not see. There's an interview about this?
Oh yeah. So there's when Make Love the Bruce Campbell Way released, he went on a book tour. And there's a couple of interviews you can find on YouTube. There's one he did at the Microsoft campus, and another one it's at some local bookstore. And none of the recording values are great. It's really interesting. If you've never seen Bruce Campbell outside of a movie, it's really interesting to watch him in interviews because he is surprisingly sharp. He always plays, it sounds to me like he's played the same kind of character in Burn Notice. He always plays like a parody of himself, where he's a loser, kind of a con man, kind of dumb, like doesn't realize the effect he's having on people.
Hey now, older women need love too, and he needs a nice allowance from them. He's drinking and screwing his way through his retirement, and I can respect that on some level.
I will leave that in for your wife to listen to. Like, what I really enjoyed about watching him on these book tours is he always plays a kind of dense character. Like, he's not smart, but in the interviews, he's basically doing a stand-up comedy set, and he's got the audience laughing. He's even making fun of the audience. He's making fun of his B-movie status. He's making fun of fans who are obsessed with Ash Williams. He makes fun of the fact that he's done 1 million conventions and he's answered the same question 1 million times. He's really got a good sense of humor about being a B-movie star. And he really seems to not necessarily enjoy everything about being a B-movie star, but he's made peace with it. I wanted to talk real briefly about If Chins Could Kill, Confessions of a B-Movie Actor. I wondered if you'd ever read the book.
I have not read that book, but I'm kind of interested in reading it at some point now.
I'd heard of that book before. I haven't read it myself. I'm also a little bit interested in reading it. I ask because his first book is autobiographical. It talks a little bit about his life growing up and his life as an actor. It tells some of the stories from set. And I was kind of expecting this to be an update to that. When you suggested, now I want to emphasize that you suggested, we read Make Love the Bruce Campbell Way. I believe you suggested it somewhat jokingly, and I didn't say no, so you just rolled with it.
Yes, that is how this happened.
I thought it was going to be autobiographical. I wondered, did you actually know what this book was about when you suggested it, or did you just go entirely from the title?
So, time for a confession. I've had this book for like 3 years. Since 2016, I was dating an English major at the time, and we went into a used bookstore, and I saw it, and it was like it was calling to me. So I knew that I had to get it, and my girlfriend at the time was a huge Burn Notice and Bruce Campbell fan, so she encouraged me to get it. And then it just sat on my bookshelf for the last 3 years, and here we are. I actually thought it was going to be non-fictional or only kind of fictional, you know. I thought it would be more autobiographical with embellishments, and instead we got basically what I wrote for Eden. Available, by the way, on Amazon.
Please stop.
Every time. Every dollar that you foolishly give to us is $1 closer to making this our living.
I love the question mark at the end of that sentence. So regardless, Bruce Campbell's gone on the record as saying everything in the book is true except for the parts that aren't.
Yes.
Having read the book now, I have a really hard time believing that any of it was true. Except for perhaps for the fact that maybe he was once nearly cast in an A-list movie.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's true in the sense that there is a man named Bruce Campbell, and there are people named Renee Zellweger and Richard Gere. These are all people who exist in reality. That's the non-fictional element.
In researching for this, I came across a quote by Bruce Campbell that I thought was really interesting. It was in response to a question about why he decided to start writing. And he said, I saw a lot of movie books out there by people like Charlton Heston and Judy Garland, people in the A-movie business. Most of the film industry is comprised of B, C, and D material. There's very few people who actually get into the A world. From a storytelling point of view, I thought that was very much underrepresented. What about everyone else who works on these low-budget movies, have shitty careers, and are really struggling? That's most of the industry. I wanted the other side of the tracks to be heard. I felt the blue-collar side of Hollywood was missing. And I thought that was an interesting quote because I think it really did sum up the theme of this book, and it sounds like it's the theme of a lot of his writing, that there is this second side of movie making that is the B, C, D, and below tier of sort of indie low-budget movies that you don't normally hear as much about. And I kind of wondered, like, did you get the impression that that was a theme of the book as well?
Absolutely. I picked up early on that Bruce Campbell in this movie was turning it from an A-list movie to a B-list movie, despite its A-list stars, production, marketing, everything that goes into an A-list movie. And I don't know, I can't really put my finger on what would make an A-list movie and a B-list movie a B-list movie.
I really think it's a question of budget and major studio support. I don't know if there's actually an official definition as to what constitutes an A-list movie, but I don't know. Would you agree that you think like B-list or B celebrity or B movie is a little bit of a derogatory term, maybe for a low-budget movie?
I don't think there's an exact definition for a B-list movie, but it's kind of like a feeling you get. It's like an impression of the movie. And I think it does, I think you're right. I think it has a lot to do with the production and the studio support and the marketing.
I did a quick Google while we were talking. A B movie or B film is a low-budget commercial motion picture that is not an art house film. In its original usage during the golden age of Hollywood, the term more precisely identified films intended for distribution as the less publicized bottom half of a double feature, akin to a B-side in recorded music.
That's interesting. I didn't know that.
We've talked a little privately about what we think of when we think of an actor. Like, if I think of a musician or music, a lot of things come to mind. Everything from, like, garage bands to Taylor Swift and everything that's on the top 40. But if you think of an actor, if you think of a movie, 9 times out of 10, you're thinking of movies made in this one town by the same few hundred people. And I think Bruce Campbell does kind of have a point that those are not the only people making movies. Those are not the only movies in existence. And probably far more movies are produced by the B, C, and D tier crowd.
What would a C or a D movie be?
I'm thinking we're going down in varying degrees. So I think the original Evil Dead, oh boy, I want to say they had a $400,000 budget, where I'm going to say And my apologies to them because I love them. But the Red Letter Media guys like Space Cop? Maybe that's a C tier. I loved Space Cop. I could not believe they got Rich Evans to appear in it.
That was a huge get for them.
Oh my god. But yeah, I guess that would be C tier. I guess it becomes, if B film is not derogatory, C film certainly is.
So what you're saying is we are D-list podcasters.
If we are on a list, I would be honored.
So let's move on to the book itself.
Yes. Make Love the Bruce Campbell Way is a fictional story that takes place in a slightly more cartoonish version of the real world. Bruce Campbell's agent convinces him to audition for Let's Make Love, an A-list Mike Nichols-helmed romantic comedy starring Richard Gere and Renee Zellweger. Bruce was hesitant to take the audition because of several past failed attempts to break into the A-list, but his agent is able to convince him to give it one more shot. Mike Nichols is actually a big fan of Bruce Campbell, as it turns out, and has specifically requested that Bruce audition for the role of Foyle. Foyle is Richard Gere's wise in the ways of romance doorman. When Bruce arrives at the audition, a quick look at the sign-in sheet reveals that the competition for the role of Foyle is fierce, with many established actors trying for the role.
It's worth mentioning real quick that his agent also offered him the chance to author a book about relationships, which he turned down because of how ridiculous that would be.
That's true. And the reason he turns it down is because Bruce Campbell obviously doesn't know that much about relationships. That would be crazy.
Ridiculous.
Dangerous. Sorry, what are we doing? The audition doesn't go particularly well. Bruce is asked to leave before being given a chance to read the second scene. Against seemingly all odds, though, Bruce Campbell does get a call. He got the part. Unsure how best to prepare for the role, Bruce embarks on the first of a series of side quests that will go on to make up the bulk of the book. Bruce decides that the best way to get into character is to work as a doorman for a day. Like most of his ideas, though, this is going to go comically wrong. After insulting several guests and being punched in the face by one, Bruce Campbell accidentally threatens the safety of then Secretary of State Colin Powell, which, oddly enough, goes on to become a recurring thread in the story.
I did not see that coming, did you?
No, and why Colin Powell? Do you remember Colin Powell?
I do, actually.
I guess that's something we should bring up, is that this book was written in, what would that have been, 2000?
Well, he did mention that this was something he was talking about in the past tense.
So the events of the story take place, all I can say is somewhere in the Bush administration.
It would have been in the first term, because Colin Powell wasn't around in the second term.
That's digging into the deep lore.
Okay, it was 2005 that this was released, but I think it was either 2003 or 2004 that it, quote, happened.
God, there are so many levels to this. And that's why we got to keep Nate on the podcast, because he digs deep into the lore and he gets you those answers. After being released from federal custody and placed on the international security list, Campbell has to attend the first table read for Let's Make Love. At the table read, Bruce learns that the studio never wanted him to play Foyle, and the executive in charge of overseeing the production is actively trying to convince Nichols to remove Campbell. Bruce decides to prove himself. He distributes copies of a detailed backstory that he has constructed for Foyle to actors and crew, many of whom could not care less. Dare I say most of whom.
I'd probably say all of them.
He also chooses to read his lines in a ridiculous Southern accent, which is met with mocking laughter from all involved. Mike Nichols informs Bruce that he needs to work on his communication and to listen more. And this is where we begin our next side quest. But before we do, I want to ask you a couple of things, Nate. This book has significantly more pictures than are typically in a book we read. How much attention did you pay to the pictures?
I think at the beginning of the book, I looked at them and I noticed just how poor and cheap they looked. And towards the end of the book, I was just straight up ignoring them. I didn't even remember that he filed a complaint because it was in a picture and not part of the actual narrative.
Like, do you think the pictures really added anything?
I think they kind of took away, except for a few cheap laughs.
They were real hit or miss for me. It struck me a little bit as like grandma just discovered Photoshop, because they were all
Yes.
like very much like magic wand tool cut and paste. Like
They look like they were done in MS Paint instead of Photoshop. They were awful.
yeah, and I kind of I like I say they were hit or miss because some of them were legitimately funny, and most of the ones I laughed at were not the sight gag ones, but the forged documents. Like I enjoyed the photocopies of his complaint and newspaper articles and letters and things that had a lot of interesting language gags hidden in them. But I guess at what point did you just start ignoring the pictures?
At least halfway through the book. Definitely towards the end, I wasn't even really looking at them anymore.
The second thing I wanted to talk about is the structure of the book. So each chapter is kind of a little self-contained short story. Some of them are more connected to the main plot than others. And I wondered if you were expecting that, or if you thought that was an interesting way to do it. Did it make it easier for you to read the book? Did it make it harder for you to read the book, or just no change whatsoever?
I did not expect this would be the structure of the book. I thought it would be more of a constructed timeline. You know, A leads to B, leads to C, like most books. I didn't realize that it was just going to be now he's in a gentleman's club. Now he's at a bar trying to get Richard Gere laid. Yeah, that was completely unexpected. Took me off guard. I would say it did make it a little harder for me to read. Mostly just because my motivation. I would go into the chapter towards the end of the book, and I guess I should get this out of the way now. I think this book was about 100 pages too long. Before the ending stretch, it was getting hard to motivate myself to get through the next chapter, because while I enjoyed it, it didn't have any real impact on the book as a greater whole. I don't know if you had any similar experience to that or not.
Yeah, as we were reading it, I remember sending you a text message that the novelty had worn off and it was becoming a bit of a slog to get through. Looking back on it after having a couple of days since reading it, I do think it probably is not intended to be read like a novel, just cover to cover. I think it's probably intended to be maybe something you carry with you and read as you have time. And in that capacity, I think the shorter self-contained chapters work pretty well. Like if you had 20 minutes to read, you'll get a complete story. But when you start consuming like 3 and 4 chapters at once, you start to wonder like, okay, where is this going? Where is this going? Why isn't it getting there? And the sight gags start to look like padding. And you mentioned the book being about 100 pages too long, and unlike most of the books we read, I don't think it's really necessary to summarize every chapter of this book. There is a narrative that flows throughout the entire book, and I definitely want to cover the chapters that have the most to do with that. So we'll get into it a little bit more, but most books just number their chapters. My two favorite non-plot related chapters are Dillinger's Dick and Dial M for Marriage.
I think I agree with Dial M for Marriage. I like that chapter. I didn't really care for a Dillinger's Dick, honestly.
That's literally the first time I've ever heard someone say that.
I'm also going to go over Midlife Miasma, briefly. There's not much to that one. I would like to open with a quote that you will almost assuredly cut from this podcast. I had a hard-on that would impress my dad. You sent me that quote from that chapter, actually.
I actually was sitting in my living room and just started giggling. And my wife asked me what I was laughing at. And with no context, I just read that line to her.
I was suppressing laughter at work. I brought this book to my place of employment.
Bold.
It was not a good idea.
So was that quote the only thing?
No. I'll describe the chapter. In the movie, Bruce Campbell's character is going to pick out a car for Richard Gere's character. So Mike Nichols decides that Bruce Campbell should be the one to pick out the car that they actually use in the movie, based on all of this character work that Bruce has been doing for the film. So they go to a car lot, and let me see if I can I think he tries a whole bunch of different cars. He thinks that they all kind of suck. He's finally talked into... Do you remember the exact model by any chance? It's a...
Oh my god. It's some kind of pickup truck, isn't it?
Yeah, it's some sort of massive pickup truck is what I got. And one of the sales pitches was that it will give you an erection.
Initially, when the salesman shows Bruce Campbell the car, he's like... Bruce Campbell says, what? Like, this car just screams, like, I have erectile dysfunction. And the salesman leans in real close, and he's like, okay, but does the guy you're buying this car for actually have... Does he actually have problems? Because there's a side effect to this car. And, you know, it might be just what he needs. And as it turns out, the vibrations from a very large truck are excellent for blood flow. And now, Nate, you're a doctor or something, and I know you're going to tell me that's 100% true.
Absolutely. I regularly prescribe pickup trucks with very large engines for older adults who have trouble getting it up.
That would be awesome if you really could.
I agree. That would be great. Copay would be a bitch, though.
Probably not as much as, like, my down payment.
So he decides to take this for a test drive, and while he takes it for a test drive, a row of cars get lit on fire by eco-terrorists. And so Bruce Campbell...
This is another, like, 2005 thing, because a bunch of eco-terrorists pop up and light a row of Hummers on fire.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't seen a Hummer in 10 years.
Yeah, it's been a long time. That's a very good point. I thought nothing of that.
Oh, that stood out to me. As soon as they said Hummer, I was like, oh my god, that's right. People, like, I remember being in college and people driving those.
Basically tanks without the turret.
They were, right? They were, like, military vehicles.
Yeah, and they were built like solid bricks on wheels, and they just destroyed fuel mileage. So yeah, eco-terrorists come in, they light fire to Hummers, and Bruce Campbell, the hero that he is, takes it upon himself to track these people down. So he races off after them, and he ends up, pushing them down a hill, was it?
Yeah, he gets into a big car chase, and he chases the eco-terrorists. They throw a bunch of, like, obstructions at him out of the back of their pickup, but he manages to, like, steer through it and knock them off the road, and I think their car blows up?
I know that their car blows up, for sure. And then he decides that he's going to buy that car, and he's going to drive it all the way back to the film studio. And when he gets there, everyone is cheering him because he straight murdered those eco-terrorists. Gets out of the car, stands on the hood, and he completely forgot the side effects of that car, and everyone gasps at his humongous erection, and that's the end of that story.
I think Renee Zellweger was especially impressed.
Yes, he did mention that she would never forget him now. Earlier in the story, she was calling him by the wrong name, and from that point on, she always remembered who he was.
So, the first one I wanted to talk about is perhaps equally immature, and I'm surprised you don't enjoy it as much as I did. Maybe I'm just a 12-year-old boy. But Bruce Campbell, for whatever reason, decides it would be good for his research to go to the Smithsonian and learn more about relationships presidents had with their wives, because who had better relationships than presidents and their wives? There's really not a lot of justification given. First thing he does when he goes to the Smithsonian is he sees Archie Bunker's chair from the show All in the Family, which I'm sure someone listening remembers. I watched every episode.
I had no idea what he was talking about.
Oh no, I'm so old. No. I've seen every episode. Oh man, this in the NCIS comment. I promise I was born after 1980. He sits in Archie Bunker's chair, which, ouch, and he destroys it. And he blames it on a small child, but tells the small child that he's the chief science man who's going to save the world from environmental destruction, and he needs to keep his job. And the child, with a wink and a nod, takes the blame, and Bruce Campbell comments that, maybe 2 to 3 years in junior detention won't be so bad.
I did like that part.
And after that, he moves on to the room he came for. He buys a cheesesteak. That's important. He buys a cheesesteak that he can't finish because it is a pretty big cheesesteak. It's important. He meets with a librarian of the Smithsonian who...
I believe you mean an archivist.
An archivist, yes. And she brings out the presidential letters that he requested, and he reads through them, and there's a couple of jokes about the presidents, but that's not why we're here. We're here because Bruce Campbell is aware that the Smithsonian secretly has John Dillinger's dick preserved somewhere in this building. And when he asks the archivist about it, she becomes rightfully annoyed, or so it seems. But after making a deal with the archivist's assistant, Bruce Campbell is led to a room that has been left open secretly so that he can enter, where the precious member is enshrined.
The precious member.
When he gets into that room, he arrives just in time to see a man in a full-on, Mission Impossible ninja suit trying to steal John Dillinger's phallus. And Bruce Campbell has to wrestle him and beat him up, and then the archivist comes in and he takes her hostage, and Bruce Campbell has to negotiate. And
didn't he want to put it on his coffee table or on his mantle?
I'm hearing a lot of judgment in your voice. And I don't think I appreciate your tone, sir. Check yourself.
Before I wreck myself?
Check yourself. Anywho, Bruce Campbell, then they walk out, and they're going to have to make the exchange where Bruce Campbell is going to have to give the guy John Dillinger's penis in exchange for the woman's safety. And Bruce Campbell thinks quickly, and he manages to swap the cheesesteak for the penis, which is my favorite sentence I've ever said.
I think it's my favorite sentence I've ever heard you say.
Why don't you like this chapter?
I'm starting to turn a corner as you explain it to me.
You just needed to hear my voice.
I actually thought about buying the audiobook if Bruce Campbell was the one narrating.
That's an interesting thing to mention. I've heard that the audiobook for this is actually done like a radio play. I think they actually have a couple of actors come in and do it. The second chapter I enjoyed, that I think we both liked, was it, it was a little bit more mature and not in a bad way. Bruce Campbell, continuing to do relationship research, decides to take one job as a wedding planner. And he's dealing with some Midwestern folks who really passionate about football, really blue collar. Their kids are getting married. They don't like each other. The parents are hijacking the entire wedding planning session. And the kids, when Bruce Campbell finally makes the sale of this like $1 million wedding, the kids are outside, no longer involved in the discussion at all. Bruce sees him on his way out, and he talks to him. And after talking to him for a little bit, he gives them 2 tickets to Vegas to get a quickie wedding, and just to have the kind of wedding that they want to have, because the marriage is about them. It's not about their parents. And he genuinely makes 2 people happy. It's one of the few good things he does in the book.
Hey, now, he murders eco-terrorists with a gigantic truck.
You and I may feel differently about the morality of that one.
No, I don't think we do, actually.
One of the interesting things I've noticed in the book is that Bruce Campbell paints himself as just a schlubby scumbag, kind of. He's lazy, he doesn't know, he's not competent, he's rude, he objectifies women, he's just crass and ill-mannered. But there is one line he never crosses, despite how much like potty humor and I guess just blue humor the book goes into. He never even comes close to cheating on his wife or betraying his wife in any way. As much as Bruce Campbell may comment on how hot a girl is, he never makes a move. Bruce Campbell in real life, he has been married twice, but his second marriage, I believe, I think at the time of the book, he'd been married for 14 years. He seems to genuinely enjoy his family, seems to genuinely love his wife, and actually respects the institution of marriage. I think that was one part of the character, like one part of Bruce Campbell's actual personality that he didn't distort and take to a cartoony extent for the purposes of the book.
I didn't notice it initially, but I definitely see it when you point it out. He never crosses that line, or you're right, he doesn't even come close to crossing that line. And I did get the sense throughout the book that he did really love his wife and enjoy being with her. At the time of reading this, I was actually preparing for a friend's wedding, which was costing them $20,000 and was this big overblown nightmare that he didn't want.
Oh, no.
But he did it because he wanted to make his wife happy. And I mean, I can see why you would do that, but I was like, I would not want that wedding at all. I would not trade my wedding for his.
Like, I know people who are from different cultures where weddings are huge, and they're fine. Like, if that's your thing, if that's what you want, if you want to bring everybody together for that, totally cool. But I really liked it. Took a shot at an industry that sometimes I think takes advantage of people. He goes out of his way in this chapter to point out that the wedding planners could not care less about the success of the relationship as long as the wedding is as expensive as possible. And while I think that is a cartoonish distortion of what a wedding planner does, I do think it's interesting that in this book by this guy who claims to know nothing about relationships, one of the few things he doesn't compromise on, and one of the few things like he doesn't allow himself to be influenced by, is the commercialization of relationships. Bruce Campbell seems to really get what's going on there. That's probably part of Bruce Campbell's actual personality. If the book didn't have a decent emotional core, it would be really easy to get lost in kind of the trash. It gave the book a little bit of much needed heart.
I agree 100%. This was one of the better chapters, and I agree that this is one we should have covered.
All right, so with those out of the way, let's dive into the meat of the book, the plot.
As a quick aside, and you can just cut this out, I had to look up one of the movies he referenced because I could not believe that it was a real thing.
What's that?
It was Bubba Hotep?
Oh, you've never seen Bubba Hotep?
No.
Oh my god, we should have talked about that at the beginning.
That good, huh?
I don't know, because you don't like Evil Dead. Like, I don't even know how to relate to you. Like, I feel like I'm talking to an alien. Nah, kid, but it is dumb.
Okay.
Yeah, so...
Alrighty, let's get into the book.
Right. I think the first chapter we should talk about is An Idiot and a Gentleman. With the relationship between Foyle and Richard Gere's character being essential to the success of this film, Richard Gere and Bruce decide that it would be best to meet up to rehearse their lines and discuss the scenes and the dynamic of this relationship. They agree to meet up at Richard Gere's apartment, where Bruce immediately finds himself out of his element. Richard Gere has a classy, minimally decorated penthouse, and knowing that Richard Gere is a Buddhist, Bruce brings him what he felt was an appropriate gift, a 12-inch tall Buddha statue that spouts fortune cookie phrases when you rub its belly.
I would love to have that statue, but I'd probably get slapped for having it.
By me.
Yes, absolutely.
In spite of this, the two decide to work on their scene, and it is a scene where Foyle helps Gere's character fight off a mugger. After some prodding from Bruce, Richard Gere, who is a pacifist, agrees to try a version of the scene where the violence is a little bit amped up. And this culminates in the destruction of a lot of Richard Gere's property and Bruce Campbell getting his ass thoroughly kicked. But surprisingly, Richard Gere is super into it and thinks that this is a great direction to take the scene in, and he wants to present this to Mike Nichols. And the reason I wanted to mention this scene, or this chapter in specific, is because this is sort of the beginning. And I didn't quite pick up on it at first. I thought this was just going to be a funny scene where Bruce Campbell gets his ass kicked and maybe eventually gets him one step closer to getting fired by Mike Nichols. But that's not really what happened. So I wondered, like, did you pick up on what was happening here?
I picked up on it very quickly. And I think I sent you a text to that was my theory, that he was gradually going to turn the movie from what you would see as an A-list movie to more of a schlocky B-list movie with a lot of slapstick and ridiculous fight scenes. It's important to remember this is supposed to be a romance movie, and he's inserting comical fight scenes into it.
Obviously, they present the scene to Mike Nichols, and it goes even more comically wrong with Bruce Campbell getting even more hurt. And Mike Nichols just loves it. He has his assistants take notes. He changes the script to work it in better. And yeah, it's the beginning of Bruce Campbell's B-movie virus infecting the A-list film.
A quick aside, I was looking for a Buddha statue to get you as a gift, but I can't find anything like what Bruce Campbell described, so I'm sorry.
Shortly after they present their scene to Mike Nichols, and they have a lot of success in building the dynamic between Foyle and Richard Gere, and Bruce and Richard have surprisingly bonded quite well. And this leads to Richard Gere calling Bruce in the middle of the night one night to discuss scene 41A. Gere is concerned that he won't be able to pull off this scene. This is a scene where his character picks up the love interest for the first time, and Richard Gere, as it turns out, has never actually needed to try to pick up a woman before. Knowing that Bruce has been doing a lot of side questing / researching, Richard Gere thinks that he is the perfect man to help with researching the art of hitting on women. Bruce, surprisingly, isn't very good at hitting on women. In real life, Bruce Campbell has been married twice, but the second one seems to have stuck, and he feels like he's very lucky to have her, and honestly not sure how he pulled it off. But fortunately for Richard Gere, Bruce Campbell happens to know someone who is an expert on these matters. Enter Dash Darwin, king of all ladies' men. Dash is a particularly sleazy Las Vegas playboy who has picking up women down to a literal science.
Richard Gere was first taken to the makeup department, and they made him look much uglier so that he looked like a regular, plain, average dude.
For good or for bad, this reminded me of a scene you would write. I kind of want you to tell me a little bit about Dash Darwin.
You know, I was getting a lot of strong me vibes as well.
I don't remember writing this.
The Great Wasteland Train had similar characters, I suppose.
It was interesting. I remember reading this. So I think we've talked about this in the podcast before, but Nate and I started off going back and forth as writing partners, just writing little short stories, and one of us would write and one of us would edit. I remember Nate having a character very much like Dash Darwin and telling Nate in my edits, like, maybe you need to dial it back. And then reading this chapter, I was like, oh no, did I prevent Nate from getting published? Like, maybe you should have leaned in, man.
So Dash, he set up his entire apartment and his entire being around getting with a woman. He's got 3 different settings for lighting in his apartment for the first, second, and third date so that he can bed her. He's got
oh, the way you word things.
I was gonna say score, but
that would have somehow been more respectful.
Do you want me to re-say that?
No, I want to leave that in, and I want to leave this part in talking about it.
He's got some terrible smelling cologne that he thinks is an aphrodisiac.
I think it has like animal pheromones in it.
I believe it does, yes. What else? Did he do anything with his clothes, or am I good with his description?
The drink selection.
Oh, that's right. He had a different drink selection for each date.
Yeah, and it's all designed around, again, I don't know how deep you dive into the troll side of YouTube. The frightening thing is, now this guy is like a teddy bear version of what a guy like this actually is like. But my God, this exists.
Oh, I know it exists.
Yeah. He gets Richard Gere dressed up. He gets him scented up. He also has a whole... You'll appreciate this as a doctor or whatever it is you are. He has a whole pharmacy.
Oh, that's right.
Performance enhancers, and...
He takes that before he goes to the bar.
How does that play out?
They find their quarry.
Oh. You make it worse.
Their prey. He wants to show Richard Gere how to make things happen. So they go and they sit on either side of this woman, which seems like it would be very threatening. And they wait for her to respond. She turns to Richard Gere and wants to leave with him immediately, and so they do. Then Dash makes up a bunch of excuses for why it didn't work for him, and Bruce mentions to him that was in fact Richard Gere, and so Dash is like, well, I can't compete with a Hollywood celebrity like that. So he goes to try to score with another...
It's still bad. I know I told you to say it, and it's still bad.
It's supposed to be. He goes to try to make love the Dash way. And she ends up picking apart every single thing about him. His smell, his crappy clothing, his terrible way of introducing himself. She just shits all over him, but not in a way that he would have preferred. And finally, his biological clock hits 0 because he had taken the blue pill, and now he has an erection that Bruce Campbell's dad would be proud of. And he has to run to the bathroom to deal with his encroaching manhood. How is that?
It's fine. I will enjoy listening to all of that as I edit this episode.
Just keep all that in, you know.
Oh, God, that's what she said.
All right, so the next chapter that we wanted to talk about was A Fitting We Will Go. Bruce Campbell shows up to get fitted for his costume, and he is asked if he'd like to see what Renee Zellweger is going to wear. And when he inspects the suit that she is getting fitted in, Bruce determines that it is not doing enough to showcase her ass. The costume designer is rightly a bit offended, but Renee begins to show signs of doubting the costume choice. Bruce presses the point that Renee Zellweger has worked very hard to have an attractive body, and that should be celebrated. Eventually, he gets her to agree after he goes back and forth with the costume designer who really wanted Bruce to just get the hell out of there. And they go ahead and they try it Bruce's way, and then he brings in some guy who happened to be walking by as a unbiased judge who helps to convince Renee that she should show her body off more.
And the reason I wanted to include this chapter is because this is the point where I realized that, he is turning this into a B movie. I could believe that Richard Gere might develop a weird relationship with Bruce Campbell, and that would influence Richard Gere's performance. But when he basically tells Renee Zellweger that she is not being properly objectified, and she's like, that's a good point. That's when I realized what was going on here.
Way to play catch up.
One of the interesting things I've heard about in Bruce Campbell's talks about being in B movies and about movies in general is his point that A-list movies have slowly started to become more like B-list movies as they try to appeal to just the broadest audience possible. One of the things he talked about was like superhero movies. Guy in a spider costume, that's B-movie. That's his realm of ridiculous stuff.
Well, it all depends on, do you like romance movies? I would like the B-movie better because it does appeal to, like you said, the broader audience. It has fight scenes and ridiculous crap thrown in, and I would see that movie, more likely I would see that movie over seeing the romance movie that it would have been.
If you're given the choice between Michael Keaton's Batman and Citizen Kane,
I would probably go for Citizen Kane just because it's been like a decade since I've seen that movie and I'm due for a rewatch.
Okay, that's interesting. But
if you're going to say Batman or 50 First Dates, I'm going to go with Batman.
I was trying to compare it to... I don't necessarily want to compare it to like a bad romantic comedy. Have you ever seen... it's not a romantic comedy, but it's maybe a movie more geared towards women. Have you ever seen Mean Girls?
I have not.
I love Mean Girls. What's a good romantic... Have you ever seen 10 Things I Hate About You?
I've seen probably the majority of that movie.
Do you think that movie would have been better if Heath Ledger had to fist fight somebody?
If he dressed up as a clown and threatened?
No. I think it's obvious, or it's supposed to be obvious, that he's not making the movie better. And I think it's also obvious that movies that rely on the more slapstick approach aren't necessarily bad either. they both still have value. Do you think? What do you think? Like the real Bruce Campbell, not the Bruce Campbell character, but what do you think the real Bruce Campbell is trying to say about movies?
You said that he thinks they're gradually they're trying to incorporate B movie, aesthetics into A movies. They're gradually becoming more and more B movie to have a broader audience.
Well, I know one of the things I was sort of thinking about as I said that was the idea that slapstick is a universal form of comedy.
Right.
It's harder to sell a comedy that relies on a lot of intelligent play on word style humor in a worldwide market, especially to like a non-English speaking market, because there just might not be a same way to translate the gag in another language. And similar with romance. And I think as Hollywood tries to play more and more to a global market, especially the Chinese market, they are relying more and more on the universal stuff like slapstick, like sex appeal, things that they don't have to put too much effort into translating.
Well, what do you think about the objectification of Renee?
Yeah.
You think he's trying to say anything there?
I think that's actually a subtle jab, not a not so subtle jab, at B movies and their reliance on that sort of thing. I know he calls it out at least once or twice in Ash versus Evil Dead. There is an attractive female co-star. Oh, there's a couple of attractive female co-stars, and not the least of which is Lucy Lawless, Xena Warrior Princess, who seems to actually be friends with Bruce Campbell in real life, which I kind of love. He makes comments about how like, yeah, we're both smoking hot people, and you know, of course, Bruce Campbell's still got his gut and his gray hair and all that. And I think Bruce Campbell is probably saying that the reliance on tropes and objectification is probably part of the reason why B movies sometimes stay B movies. The whole thing is sort of a discussion about the business of making movies and about what movies are or should be, or why is one thing more valued than another. Objectification sells. Sex sells. Everybody knows that.
Hey, they're trying to sell the men now too. Every Marvel movie has a take off your shirt and show your abs off scene. Sorry, I'm distracted by this fucking cat. Hold on one moment. Let me go. All right, the home stretch.
Yeah, I think the last quarter of the book really wraps up the plot, and it all is involved in the main storyline. There's no more breaks for side quests. And I think the first chapter that really starts the home stretch is Lights, Camera, Mayhem. During the camera test for Let's Make Love, Bruce managed to talk them into trying a shaky cam rig using handheld shots and replacing stunts with stuntmen with dummies being thrown off of buildings. Now, all this culminates in Bruce discovering chaos when he arrives on the first day of filming. There have been major rewrites to the script. Mike Nichols has decided to double down on the shaky cam, and the scene with the mugger has now become a full-fledged wire-fighting set piece. Now, even Bruce can tell something is wrong, and he knows exactly who's to blame. That studio executive from about 20 chapters ago who didn't want him to have the part and was mean to him at the table read. Bruce decides that... I'm sorry, go on.
Real quick. Did you actually think that was who was to blame?
I want to talk to you about that a little later.
Okay, let's go on for now then.
Bruce decides that he needs to break into the Paramount lot in LA and find out what the dailies look like and determine exactly what this executive is up to. Now, fortunately for Bruce, one of his former co-stars is currently working as a security guard on that lot, and he has a beef with his employer that slightly outweighs the beef he has with Bruce. So with his former co-star's aid, Bruce is able to break in and see the dailies. Now, it is as bad as he feared. Bruce decides he can't leave it at just seeing the dailies. He needs to find out what this executive is planning. So he crawls through some of the ductwork to spy on a call between the studio and Mike Nichols. During that call, Nichols is insistent that the changes stay despite the studio's insistence that they go. Bruce discovers that his nemesis seems to be pretty interested in making sure that Mike Nichols doesn't stray from this new B-movie vision. When Bruce returns to the set of Let's Make Love, he isn't there long before he's informed that he won't be needed today, and they're not really sure when they'll need him back. As Bruce is leaving, he sees that the studio executives have pulled up to the lot and are having a conversation with Mike Nichols. Later that day, Bruce receives a call from his agent informing him that he's been fired. The studio has said that Bruce Campbell carried with him a B-movie virus that had infected the production, and he had to be removed. Bruce returns to his home in Oregon, defeated. He goes through some of his old records from the Army of Darkness shoot and discovers something very interesting. A certain Rob Stern, the executive who has been trying to get him fired since the beginning, was once kicked off the set of Army of Darkness. He was an unaccompanied minor who lied about his age to be able to score a role as an extra Deadite when the movie was being filmed. Now Bruce has the third piece. He's got means, motive, and the opportunity. Bruce knows what he needs to do. There's only one way to clear his good name, and that is to break back into the Paramount lot and find evidence that proves it was actually Stern sabotaging the production and not Bruce. Bruce breaks into the Paramount lot without the help of his former co-star, who has suspiciously refused his request. Through the use of a clever disguise, Bruce is able to bluff his way back into the lot and into Stern's office. Bruce finds the proof that he needs in the form of a series of emails. Now, Nate, I need your help here because I never actually figured this out in my reading of the book. Who do you think it was that actually sabotaged the production? There's only one line of confirmation we get that the emails contained the proof, and it is this. Quote, "Randomly, I opened enough of the emails to determine that Stern had slowly, methodically masterminded the Army of Darknessization of the Let's Make Love script. He ignored budget implications, and when things began to go horribly wrong, blamed it all on the enthusiastic but undeserving actor. Parentheses, that would be me. End quote." Do you think, we don't know what Bruce actually read in the emails? Is he an unreliable narrator here?
It seemed like the book was implying that it was somehow his fault, even though the rest of the book points to Bruce Campbell being the reason for the Army of Darknessization. Rob Stern steals the sword, a prop that goes missing from Army of Darkness, and he's kind of a dick. So I don't know. Maybe you had a different take on it. I certainly thought Bruce Campbell was the culprit, but he says that he wasn't.
I can't decide. This is a meta conversation, so there's no answer in the book. I can't decide if it was a hasty writing choice from Bruce Campbell, the real Bruce Campbell, not the character, to have Rob Stern be an actual villain. And he just establishes that, yes, he was the actual villain in a quick throwaway line of dialogue, and then we're just supposed to believe it. Or if the real Bruce Campbell was using the character Bruce Campbell as an unreliable narrator, and that this is just a delusion on Bruce Campbell's part, that this guy may genuinely be bitter towards Bruce Campbell, but the guy is just a B-movie fan and genuinely didn't mind the choices, but was more than willing to throw Bruce Campbell under the bus when the studio executives didn't like it. I could see
that.
Yeah.
But it is an odd choice because at the end of the book, Rob gets let go. So it's strange because that seems to implicate him, when before it really seemed like Bruce Campbell was the catalyst for this entire movie going off the rails.
If Rob Stern was out for revenge on Bruce, he saw what Bruce Campbell was doing and gave Bruce Campbell the space he needed to fail.
I actually like that take the most, where Bruce Campbell is the reason that this is all going to hell, but Rob Stern was not doing anything to rein him in or stop him. I guess that goes back to what we were talking about with Star Wars. So you can cut this part out.
I intend to. Yeah, every time you mention Star Wars.
Good. It's not all Rian Johnson's fault. There was just someone, he was sending the dailies to someone who thought it was either good or not bad and didn't rein him in. So I can see it kind of being like that for, I've already forgotten his name. Rob.
So I guess with Rob Stern's potential motivation resolved, we'll move on. Bruce Campbell barely has the time to copy these incriminating emails onto a CD-ROM,
Onto a CD-ROM.
Yeah, even
double take.
Even in Bruce Campbell, he's a grandpa. Like, even in 2005, man, I don't know. I mean, just email them to yourself. Just forward the emails. But anyway, he copies them onto a CD-ROM. But as he finishes copying them, security rushes in. It turns out that Bruce's old co-star had seen through his disguise. And Bruce grabs the Army of Darkness prop that Rob Stern had stolen from the production, and he uses it to take his old co-star hostage. Things escalate pretty quickly. Bruce escapes and releases his hostage, but not before stealing his keys and running through the Paramount lot. His old co-star chases him, but after a series of near misses and one very well-placed groin kick, Bruce Campbell is able to escape the Paramount lot. At this point, though, the police are involved, and if that weren't enough, Colin Powell's motorcade is on its way through town.
This is his third appearance in the book, and that was 3 more than I expected.
Bruce is spotted by one of the agents who formally arrested him for harassing Colin Powell. And running out of options, Bruce has no choice but to duck into a fan's house and ask to use the fan's computer. When the fans learn that Bruce Campbell is being chased by the police, the fans, who are a mother and son, grab their guns and get ready to buy Bruce some time. I love where this book went.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. And they had the ticking timer element at the end, too.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. So, Bruce sends the file to every person he thinks might be able to help him. But the attachment is uploading painfully slow because Bruce Campbell fans can only afford dial-up. As the clock ticks down to Bruce's file being uploaded successfully, a shootout occurs. The fans are shooting towards the police, and the police are shooting towards the fan, and Bruce Campbell has just enough time to get out of the way before the Colin Powell's bodyguard kicks through the second-story window, tackles Bruce, and they have a fist fight that Bruce miraculously wins, and the file manages to upload just before the feds cut the power to the house. If you're not reading the pictures, you may not have known what happened to Bruce. Bruce is sentenced to 3 years in federal prison, during which time Paramount forces him to appear in a prison reality TV show to fulfill the contract that he signed during Let's Make Love. As it turns out, Bruce Campbell can be released from his contract, but they still had to pay him. And as part of still having to pay him, Bruce is required to appear in an equivalent production if required. And so he's forced to be in a reality TV show about celebrities in prison. But all the research he did for the role of Foyle, it can't go to waste. And he decides that maybe he should write that relationship book after all. Did you see the letter that Bruce wrote to his lawyer?
Yes, I did see that.
Okay. That was one of my favorite images in the entire book. I'll only read one quote from it, but it reads, "I think it would be cool to do a book and shit about men and they bitches." It only took Bruce 3 years to become, street as fuck.
Hey, I would watch a movie about him as a gangster.
It's time for our final thoughts.
Yeah, I'm adding Bubba Hotep to my Netflix queue.
Well, then I think Bruce Campbell's book already did its job for you. As we've been going through the summary, we've actually addressed a lot of what I would have asked for final thoughts.
I enjoyed this book. Like I said, it was a slog, but I think you're right. I think it's not meant to be read like a traditional book. You're supposed to read it in small chunks and then put it down and come back to it a little later. I would recommend this book to a very select group of my friends, and I would never again take this back to work. There was a 30-year-old man who was like, "Oh, hey, what book are you reading?" And I just showed him the cover, and he just went, "Oh." And then we didn't talk for the rest of the day.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Did you tell him you do a podcast? Did you tell him you do a literature podcast? We read things like Bruce Campbell and Star Wars and...
Yeah, not only did we read this book, but we're going to talk about it for an hour.
Not only did we read this book, we critiqued this book.
Yeah.
I would definitely say there's two main requirements for enjoying this book. One of them is you absolutely must know who Bruce Campbell is. The second prerequisite, you really need to watch Evil Dead and the Army of Darkness. If you're not familiar with the Ash persona, a lot of the comedy is played on the differences between Bruce Campbell, the man, and Ash, the character.
I think that the same people that I would recommend this book to would also have liked Space Cop. So why don't you tell everyone what you have selected for our next book?
So our next book is going to be Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay. This is a Bram Stoker award-winning novel. As I've mentioned before on this podcast, I'm a fan of spooky things and spooky books. And this book follows a family's struggle with a daughter who may possibly be possessed. I don't know. But we're going to find out next month. Let's check it out.
Bye.
Peace.
Oh my god.
That was everything I hoped it would be. 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 Everything I hoped